My brother's birthday party was supposed to be a celebration until I ended up bleeding in the hallway. I should have known better than to show up. The message earlier that day still rang sharp in my memory. Don't wear anything too flashy, Rachel. It's Brandon's night. As if I needed reminding. As if I'd ever outshine their golden sun. Still, I'd gone. I told myself it was for Aiden and Sophia, my niece and nephew, who always ran to hug me even when their mother tried to hold them back. I wore a navy blue blouse, simple earrings, and tied my hair back into a neat bun. Nothing flashy. Just quiet dignity. The Caldwell estate looked like a page from an overpriced lifestyle magazine. Fairy lights strung across the wraparound porch wine glasses, tinkling like wind chimes, laughter echoing across the perfectly trimmed lawn. A banner stretched across the archway, Happy 40th. Brandon, I swallowed my pride and walked inside. Vanessa greeted me with her trademark fake warmth. Rachel! You made it. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. We weren't sure you'd come. You're always busy with your work. It's good to see you too. Vanessa, I replied, forcing calm. The house smelled like citrus and money. Chandeliers glinted overhead, and Margot, my mother, stood by the drinks table like a queen overseeing her court. She waved her wine glass in greeting, but didn't move to embrace me. Rachel, she said, eyes skimming my outfit. You look rested. That top, it's not one of those clearance pieces you mentioned, is it? I smiled thinly. No, I left the clearance rack for my tax advisor. She blinked, thrown off by the comeback, then turned to refill her glass. Beside her, Richard didn't even bother with a hello. Dinner was served organic salmon risotto, roasted vegetables, arranged like art. I picked at my plate, trying to make conversation with Aiden, who whispered to me about a school science project while his mother scowled across the table. Then came the toast. Brandon stood up, champagne flute in hand, arm looped around Vanessa's waist. Thank you all for coming. I know we don't get together as often as we should. Family is everything, right? He looked around with a polished grin. And we've all taken different paths, some more successful than others. Laughter rippled through the room. Then his gaze landed on me. But seriously, he went on, raising his glass. Let's toast to my sister Rachel, who's shown us all that with just a little stubbornness. And a condo on the edge of foreclosure, you can still show up looking like a tax deduction. The room froze. Even the music seemed to dim. I stood. That's enough. Oh, come on, he smirked. You know I'm kidding. No, you're not. He stepped forward too close. Don't be dramatic. I'm not the one turning a birthday toast into a roast, I snapped. I could feel every eye in the room, watching silent and hungry. Brandon leaned in, voice lower. You think you're better than us because of your little condo? Please. We all know Dad had to co-sign your mortgage. That's a lie. He smirked again, cool, cruel. Is it? I turned to leave, fury and humiliation pounding in my ears. Then I felt it, a shove. I stumbled sideways. My shoulder slammed against the hallway corner, and I collapsed to the hardwood floor. Pain flared through my arm, and I tasted metal in my mouth. Someone gasped. No one came forward. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving. No blood on my blouse, but my elbow throbbed, and my pride bled freely. I found the guest bathroom and locked the door behind me. My breath echoed off marble tiles and glass fixtures. I ran cold water over my arm and tried not to cry. But then I heard it through the vent voices from the hallway. She's lucky we even invite her, Margot's voice hissed. She doesn't belong here, never has. The words sliced cleaner than any shove. I stared at myself in the mirror, water dripping down my forearm, and I no longer recognized the woman looking back. She wasn't the dutiful daughter. She wasn't the overlooked sibling. She was something else now. Something burning. I pulled out my phone with a trembling hand, thumbs moving before I could stop myself. I need to get out. This isn't just petty, it's war. Families don't stab you in the back. They smile, then aim lower. I hadn't left my condo in 2 days. The lights stayed dim, curtains drawn. The only sound came from the humming fridge and the occasional ping of a news alert I didn't care to check. My shoulder had turned a deep, ugly purple, and I'd bandaged the scrape at my elbow as if it could cover something deeper. I hadn't responded to Naomi's calls. I wasn't ready to speak it aloud yet. Instead, I brewed tea and stared at the growing pile of unopened envelopes on my counter. Months' worth. I had always prided myself on keeping things tidy, financially, emotionally, but lately, the weight of silence had drowned everything. Maybe I'd let myself fall behind on more than just sleep. I picked one up. The envelope was from First Eastern Mortgage. I blinked. I didn't have a mortgage with them. And then, I remembered. The memory came rushing back Thanksgiving 2020. My father, glass of scotch in hand, speaking in that reassuring, matter-of-fact tone he reserved for when he wanted something. "It's just a refi, Rachel. Your name helps with the rate. It's temporary. I don't live there," I'd said, glancing at the manila folder he'd pushed across the table. "Your family. You'll always be a part of this house." My mother had nodded with a tight smile. "We'd do the same for you." I'd signed. Naive. Loyal. Desperate to be seen as more than the outsider they made me feel like. Back in the present, I flipped through the document. It wasn't from 2020. This was dated July 2022. Another loan. My name was on it. My hands trembled as I set it aside and reached for my laptop. I needed answers. I logged into my credit monitoring account, entered the security code, and held my breath. There, it was an open account with First Eastern Mortgage co-borrower listed as Rachel Morgan. Loan amount $210, still active, still mine. A pit opened in my stomach. I called Naomi. She picked up on the second ring. "Rachel." "They did it again," I whispered. "What?" "My name. It's on a second mortgage I never agreed to." Silence, then a sharp inhale. "Wait, what do you mean again?" "They used me. Dad, he forged my signature, or, God, I don't even know how, but this loan isn't from 2020. It's from last year. I never saw it." Naomi's voice dropped. "You need to talk to someone. A lawyer. I can't afford a lawsuit. You might not have to sue. Just get answers. Confirm if this is legal. If you're on the hook, you deserve to know how deep it goes." I sat back, heart-pounding eyes unfocused. I saw them again in my mind, my father's offhand confidence, my mother's practiced calm. They hadn't just failed to protect me. They'd weaponized my trust. I pulled open my filing cabinet, flipping through old folders. The original 2020 documents were their pages, initialed in careful loops. But this 2022 file? I'd never laid eyes on it. The signature looked like mine, but something felt wrong. Too neat, too rehearsed. I'd never signed anything on July 8th, 2022. I was in the hospital that week with Naomi after her appendectomy. I remembered every detail. I scanned the copy into my computer, naming the file Loan Fraud 1 PDF, the first brick. I stood in the middle of my kitchen trying to slow my breathing. Every step I took from now on would need to be documented. Clean, controlled, legal. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. They didn't just hurt me emotionally. They tied my name to debt and left me exposed, silently draining my credit and risking everything I'd worked for. I thought back to Brandon's toast, the smug grin, the mocking jab about my condo being on the edge of foreclosure. How would he even know that unless someone told him? Unless someone tracked it? They were watching me. And now, I was watching back. I reached for my phone again and opened a new message to Naomi. "They used me, and it's still active. I'm on the hook. If silence is power, then mine was about to speak volumes." I hadn't told Naomi yet, but I didn't sleep after sending that last message. I stayed up lights low, hunched over my laptop while my tea went cold. The more I read, the more my stomach soured my credit report, public lending registries, anything that bore my name and their fingerprints. It was all there in plain sight, just waiting for someone to actually look. I was done being blind. The next morning, I called out sick from work, not that anyone really noticed, and drove to the county records office. The clerk at the desk, a man with kind eyes and coffee breath, didn't even blink when I requested documents tied to the Caldwell address. Co-borrower name, he asked. Rachel Morgan. M-O-R. He waved me off. Already got it. A moment later, the printer behind him spat out a small stack. You might want to take this to someone. It's not pretty. He didn't know the half of it. Back at home, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. It was like holding a mirror to my own trust. Pages of refinancing deals, deed transfers, and signature authorizations, all with a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost. But I could spot the differences. My real signature trailed slightly at the end. This one ended abruptly, like someone copying from memory. And the handwriting on the witness line, Brandon. Not even subtle. Naomi came over that night with pizza and that concerned look she always wore when I said, "Don't freak out, but I need you to see something." She flipped through the files, her eyes narrowing. "These are all tied to Brandon." I nodded. "And not just the house. My name's linked to his business account. I never signed anything." Naomi dropped the slice she hadn't even bitten. "So, wait. That means I'm financially liable if he defaults?" "On both." She let out a low whistle. "You're the family's credit card with a heartbeat." I didn't laugh. Neither did she. The next morning, I ran into Charlotte Monroe as she was coming in from a night shift. She looked tired, scrubs wrinkled hair in a haphazard bun, but her voice was kind. "Everything okay?" "Rachel, you look like you saw a ghost at the mailbox." "Something like that?" I offered a weak smile. She hesitated. "Weird question, but are you and your brother fighting?" I froze. Why, Charlotte looked around, then lowered her voice. "The night of the party, I heard yelling through your parents' hallway window. Brandon and your dad. Your name came up. Something about shutting her down before she makes noise." My skin prickled. "They didn't see me," she added. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I figured if something's going on. "Something is," I said softly. "Thank you." Back inside, I finally called the only person I hadn't yet, Danica Pierce. She answered on the third ring, voice crisp and efficient. "Rachel, Naomi told me you'd call. I have documents. Proof. At least, I think it's proof. Send me scans," she said. "Don't confront them. Just document everything, every call, every text, every memory that can be backed up with something real." I sent the scans that afternoon. 32 pages. Forged documents, co-borrower entries, timelines that didn't match. I attached a photo of my passport to show my signature. That night, I dug into Brandon's business filings, publicly accessible thanks to the state's transparency laws. What I found made my blood pressure spike. A line of credit issued in early 2023 using the same financial firm as the house loan. Co-borrower R. Morgan. Danica's words rang in my head. Every memory backed with something real. I pulled out a folder from my bookshelf, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a calendar from 2023, scribbled with Naomi's hospital stay, my Airbnb receipts from that week, even photos from our girls' night with timestamps. I couldn't have signed anything on the loan dates. I'd been states away. I scanned them too. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, my entire dining table was a war zone of files, photos, and annotated printouts. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't showered. I barely remembered to breathe. My phone buzzed. "Danica," I answered on the first ring. "I've seen enough," she said, her tone sharpened by certainty. "You might own more than you think. They used my signature to trap me. I'd use their words to free myself." I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, smoothing the front of my navy sweater with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The small black smartwatch on my wrist blinked softly, recording mode activated. I took a breath, held it for 5 seconds, then exhaled slowly. Danica had told me to wait, but I couldn't. This wasn't about confrontation. Not yet. This was reconnaissance. I was going to see my mother. March 26th, late afternoon. The weather had turned indecisive, sunlight pierced through scattered clouds like a lie dressed in sincerity. I parked a block away from the Caldwell house. The walk gave me time to rehearse, to smile where it would sting, to lie better than I ever had. Margot answered the door in a silk blouse and pearls, as if expecting guests worthy of her attention. "Rachel," she said, her mouth forming my name like it tasted bitter. "Didn't think I'd see you so soon." "I thought we should talk," I replied. "Clear the air?" Her eyes flicked to my wrist. New toy, I resisted the urge to flinch. Birthday gift to myself. She led me into the kitchen. Everything was pristine stainless steel appliances, ivory backsplash polished marble island. A home so clean it felt like no one really lived in it. "I'll make tea," she said. "Still drink chamomile." "Sure." We sat across from each other, the tea between us growing cold faster than our conversation. Margot gave me that poised pageant queen smile that never reached her eyes. "You've been quiet," she finally said. "You've been busy." She didn't answer, only tapped a manicured nail against her cup. "I suppose Brandon's party stirred up emotions." I gave her a neutral smile. It did. Margot shifted, adjusting her cardigan like she was about to deliver a monologue. "Families go through things. You've always been a little sensitive." "I just want to understand," I said carefully. "The house, the loan, my name on everything. Was that really necessary?" She blinked. "It wasn't personal." "Rachel, you're not being accused of anything. That's not an answer." Her lips curved slightly, that old smugness creeping in. "You wouldn't have gotten the rate on your own. Richard's credit isn't what it used to be. You were the optimal choice." "You mean the only one with a decent credit score?" I said flatly. Margot chuckled. "It's not like we drained your bank account." "No, just borrowed my future." She leaned in. "You always exaggerate. The condo was meant for Brandon's family eventually. You live alone. You don't even like the neighborhood." I stared at her. "You think that gives you the right?" Margot's smile turned razor sharp. "I know how to make people talk without saying a word. I spoke to the bank manager myself. The paperwork was handled discreetly." Her voice lowered conspiratorially. "Rachel was just a name on paper. We needed the loan. It worked. Don't act like you weren't part of this family until now." The watch buzzed once, a vibration only I could feel. Audio captured. Battery still green. Everything she said stored. She stood smoothing her blouse. "Are we done with this little drama?" I stood too, my heart pounding in my throat. "For now." At the door, she kissed me on the cheek like we were still playing pretend. "Take care of yourself, dear." I walked briskly to my car, shut the door, and sat there for a full minute gripping the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt clean, like breathing for the first time after holding it underwater. On the drive home, I played the clip back once. Margot's voice was crisp, unfiltered. "Rachel was just a name on paper. We needed the loan." I pulled over, hands steady now, and opened a text thread with Danica. "Got it." She admitted it. On tape. The moment I pressed play, everything changed. The soft whir of the speaker filled the room. I sat motionless, perched at the edge of Danica's office couch, the familiar scent of old leather and lavender oil grounding me. The words I had recorded, Margot's voice, crisp and unbothered, played clearly. "Rachel was just a name on paper. We needed the loan. No denial, no ambiguity." She had handed me a blade wrapped in silk. Proof in her own words that I was never family in the way they claimed. Danica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as the clip ended. "That's as clear as it gets, and admissible." My pulse was a steady throb in my throat. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she replied. "It confirms intent, fraud, and collusion. Combine that with the forged signature on the second loan, and we've got a real case." I nodded slowly, not quite trusting my voice yet. The weight of betrayal pressed harder now, but so did clarity. There was no more room for doubt or retreat. Back at my condo, Naomi was pacing the kitchen, a sandwich untouched on the counter. She looked up, hopeful. "So, they admitted it," I said, slipping off the watch and placing it gently on the table. "On tape. And it's clean." Her face lit with something between rage and triumph. "Then let's go to war." I let the words hang in the air before shaking my head. No, this isn't a war. It's something quieter, more permanent. She didn't press. Instead, she slid her phone across the counter. I've got something too. Look at this. I watched the clip she had taken from Brandon's birthday party. The moment he raised his glass, faux charmed smile in place and said, "To my little sister, always," living just above her means. Laughter had followed. Mine included bitter and short. Defamation, Danica had said when I'd shown it to her earlier that morning. Public slander may not hold in court, but it paints a picture, especially when paired with everything else. We compiled the footage labeled digital folders, printed copies of mortgage forms, and listed the forged documents. Danica had a paralegal scan Margot's audio admission and cross-check its chain of custody. My job was simple, but sacred: sign the declaration that would begin the lawsuit. A single signature this time in my own name. Not borrowed, not stolen. "I won't let this swallow me," I murmured as I wrote. Danica smiled faintly. "Good, because from this moment, everything's going on the record." It was only later, walking alone through the center of town, that the magnitude of the day caught up with me. I had mailed cease and desist letters to my parents and Brandon. The copies were certified, stamped, and legally documented. It was official. Rachel Morgan wasn't asking for peace anymore. She was demanding justice. At the edge of the street, as I waited for the light to change, I heard my name, Brandon. He looked the same as always, tailored, confident, already halfway smug. "Heard you're making noise," he said, stepping closer. "Careful, Rachel. You're not built for this kind of fight." I met his eyes and gave nothing. "You'll find out what I'm built for soon enough." He smirked, turned, and walked away. The threat was thinly veiled, but I'd seen worse. I'd lived through worse under their roof, behind their forced smiles, beneath their expectations. That night, I sat by my window, the rain streaking faint lines across the glass. Below, headlights blurred past, slicing through the darkness like broken promises. I cradled a mug of tea between my hands, warmth seeping into my palms, but not quite reaching my chest. Naomi had offered to stay over, but I declined. Some victories had to be experienced in solitude, if only to remember how far you'd crawled to earn them. "This isn't revenge," I said aloud to the room, to myself, to the memory of every time I'd been told to stay silent. It's reclamation. Some truths don't scream. They whisper until they shatter everything. It started with a folder no thicker than a sandwich menu. Just a few papers retrieved from the county records office after hours of waiting, signing forms, and pretending I wasn't shaking. But when I opened it at my kitchen table, highlighter in hand and phone beside me, it felt like I'd cracked open a fault line in the earth. Brandon had done it again. Only this time, the target wasn't just my name. It was my home. The first page was a lien release document dated a year ago, April 3rd, 2024. My signature sat at the bottom in blue ink, smooth and practiced. The problem was I had never seen that paper in my life. My breath hitched. I flipped the next page. Property records, legal descriptions, and there it was. My condo listed as collateral for a short-term loan. The beneficiary, a shell company, registered in Delaware, newly formed in Vanessa's name. It wasn't enough they'd stolen money. Now they were flipping houses using mine as leverage. I remembered the way my dad used to pat Brandon's shoulder like he was already the golden heir. "Don't worry," he'd said once right in front of me, as if I were a lamp or a coat rack. "She signs anything." Apparently, that had been taken as gospel. The condo was mine in title, mine in upkeep. But in their eyes, it had always been an asset to manipulate. I had paid every mortgage installment, every tax bill, every renovation. And they had turned it into a bargaining chip. The tea beside me had gone cold. The silence in the condo pressed around me like fog. I stood and crossed the room, pacing once, twice, then picked up my phone. Danica answered on the second ring. "Hey, everything okay?" "No," I said. "Far from it." I explained what I'd found, reading the details slowly, deliberately. Every time I paused, Danica would ask for clarification. Date again, whose name on the deed, which loan institution. When I finally stopped, She let out a low whistle. Rachel, this isn't just sketchy. This is a coordinated financial fraud. I didn't sign this. I swear. I believe you. But now, we need handwriting analysis. Bank statements, any evidence showing you weren't present when this was filed. I can pull up location history. I wasn't even in the state when this was notarized. Perfect, she said, her tone sharp now. Focused. That'll help. But brace yourself. This moves the case into criminal territory. If Brandon and Vanessa filed knowingly fraudulent documents using your identity, they could go to jail. Yes, I sank into the couch legs heavy. Part of me had fantasized about justice, but the abstract kind. Headlines, apologies, financial restitution. I hadn't thought about handcuffs, about what it would feel like to see someone I grew up with, someone I once trusted, implicitly hauled into court with a defense attorney whispering strategy in his ear. The front door creaked. Charlotte's voice called softly through the open crack. Rachel. She stepped in holding a plastic container wrapped in foil. I made lasagna. Thought you could use something warm. I blinked. You didn't have to. I didn't, she said with a smile. But I wanted to. She set it down on the counter, glanced at the papers. Long day, the longest. Charlotte's eyes flicked to the highlighted pages. But she didn't pry. Don't let them harden you, she said quietly. Stay sharp, but don't lose your softness. It's where your strength lives. After she left, I sat by the window, fork in hand, lasagna untouched. The condo was quiet again, my safe place now weaponized without my consent. I pulled out the lien release once more. My name sat there, pristine, obedient, but the pen that wrote it wasn't mine. The consent wasn't mine. This was no longer a family squabble. Danica's voice came through clearly on speakerphone as I stared at the forged signature. Rachel. This is fraud. We're not just fighting over family now. This could be criminal. They played with fire. I gave it oxygen. The coffee shop was quiet that morning, almost unnaturally so. Tucked into a corner booth beneath a fogged-up window, I stirred my lukewarm espresso with a wooden stick I didn't need. My nerves had gotten there before the caffeine. Naomi sat across from me, arms crossed, foot bouncing. He's late. He's retired, I said, glancing at the door. Maybe he moves slower now. But when Mr. Lang entered, he didn't move slowly at all. Trim, crisp button-down, a black coat folded neatly over one arm. His eyes scanned the room quickly before settling on me. There was something cautious about him, like a man returning to a crime scene he didn't realize had been taped off. He slid into the booth and gave a polite nod. Ms. Morgan, thank you for meeting us. I only agreed to coffee, not questions. Naomi's tone sharpened. Then, why bring the manila folder? His gaze flicked to her, amused, and then back to me. Because I owed your grandfather a favor, and because I know what it feels like when your name is used for something you didn't choose. I leaned forward. So you remember the refinance? I handled it, he said. 2020, March. Your parents came in together, papers already in hand. My name was on those papers. Yes, he said, voice low. Your signature was too. I felt the table tilt ever so slightly beneath the weight of what he wasn't saying. Was it really mine? He paused. His hand gripped the coffee mug tighter. Naomi pressed. You knew she didn't sign it, didn't you? I wasn't the notary, he deflected. But I was told it was handled privately. By who I asked? Margot. His voice trembled around the edges now. She said you'd already approved it, and that you just didn't want to be involved directly. That it was a formality, and you believed her. I didn't want to cross the Caldwells. Your father, he has a reputation. One phone call from him could have ended my tenure at the bank. So you let it through, I said quietly. Backdated, filed, binding. He met my eyes, guilt etched deep into the lines of his face. I was pressured to file your signature because of the family name. There it was. The words didn't explode. They bled. Naomi sat back, arms now slack in her lap. I could almost hear her thoughts rattling, trying to rearrange what we'd just confirmed. Mr. Lang, I said softer now. Would you testify to that? If it came to court? He sighed. I'm retired. I don't want any trouble. You're already in it, Naomi snapped. If this comes out and you're silent, you're complicit. I kept a copy, he said after a moment. One of the originals. I'll send it. But beyond that, he stood. I'm sorry. He left the folder behind. We watched him walk out, jacket slung over his shoulder, like he hadn't just admitted to years of silence wrapped in respectability. I opened the folder. Inside the refinance documents, a note written in cursive on an internal memo sheet, Margot's handwriting. Rachel confirmed over the phone. Proceed as planned. Naomi exhaled long and low. She played everyone like a violin. I couldn't respond. My mouth was dry. All I could do was text Danica. He admitted to filing the backdated docs, said he was pressured, left evidence. She replied instantly. That's huge. We'll follow up. Don't engage with the family yet. Not until we control the narrative. Control the narrative. They had owned it for years, twisted it, bent it, weaponized it. But now I had pieces of the truth and not just the broken whispers of it. Paper, signatures, witnesses. I stepped outside the coffee shop. The morning air slapped my cheeks sharp and clean. Sunlight sliced through the clouds like something had been cleared. I thought of every dinner where I'd been sidelined, every glance they shared when I asked too many questions, every time I had been told to trust the process. And I thought of how many more lies I'd swallowed just to keep the peace. No more. I turned to Naomi, voice trembling but firm. I have enough to bring down every last one of them. The stronger my case became, the louder their silence grew. Filing the lawsuit should have felt like a climax. Instead, it felt like the first breath before diving into deep water. Danica and I stood before the clerk's desk at the courthouse, our shoulders squared beneath the weight of paper and principle. I didn't flinch when the case name appeared, Rachel Morgan v. Brandon Caldwell, Margot Caldwell, Richard Caldwell. I just signed. In silence. Not out of fear, but because something in me had shifted. My rage had gone still sharpened into something colder, more precise. Danica whispered as the clerk processed the documents. Now we see who they really are. I didn't have to wait long. By evening, the group chat lit up, not with apologies or calls for truce, but with fire and fury. A new message from Brandon linked to a video uploaded on social media. The thumbnail alone made my heart plummet. It was me, mid-sentence, brows, furrowed lips, twisted. I tapped play. The video, cropped, filtered, and laced with snide captions, was clearly from his birthday party. In it, I'm seen approaching Brandon with raised hands, a voiceover mockingly echoing, "Here comes the storm." They cut the part where he shoved me. Instead, it jumps straight to me shouting, then cuts again to me storming off like a child in tantrum. The caption, "Unstable sister, ruins birthday party. Family pleads for help." Naomi was the first to call. It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, even TikTok. They're pushing it hard, Rach. My phone buzzed nonstop. People I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly concerned. "Just saw that video. Are you okay? Didn't expect this from you, Rachel. Don't take it personally, but maybe step back for a bit." Even my old boss at the law internship emailed me to check in, tone stiff and neutral like she was bracing for a PR nightmare. Margot chimed in. "Next, of course, not to defend me. You should be ashamed, Rachel. You're destroying this family's name." Then Richard withdraw. "Now. Or we go nuclear. You won't win this." I sat in the silence that followed my phone screen, glowing like an accusation. The video had passed 100,000 views in less than 12 hours. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a smear campaign. Calculated. Timed. And it worked. I walked through town the next day and noticed its sideways glances. The awkward pause when I entered the bakery, the girl at the cafe who whispered something to her coworker. Even Charlotte, my neighbor, opened her door as I passed, and then quickly closed it again, as if proximity might be contagious. Danica, calm as ever, texted, "Don't respond. Stay the course. Truth isn't loud, but it lasts." But the truth felt very, very small in those hours, like a candle flickering in a wind tunnel. I opened my laptop and began documenting every instance of online defamation, every comment that referenced the lawsuit or accused me of mental instability. Naomi helped cross-reference usernames. Some were bots, some were real, all were cruel. And still Brandon remained silent. No apology, no clarification, just a grinning profile picture under his new post, grateful for family that lifts you up. Resilience. I almost threw my phone. That night, someone left a manila envelope on my doorstep. No return address, no note, just a printed version of the video frame by frame, like some kind of twisted storyboard. On the final image, me mid-yell, someone had scrawled in red ink, "This is who you really are." I stared at it until my eyes burned. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned it over, grabbed a pen, and wrote, "This is who you made me." Then I folded the photo in half, shoved it into the trash, and took a breath so deep it hurt. They wanted me to back down. They wanted to humiliate me into submission, frame me as hysterical, irrational, everything they had quietly labeled me for years. But this time, I had the receipts, and I had no intention of being silent again. My phone vibrated with a final text that night from Richard. "Withdraw. Final warning. We will bury you in court and out of it." I walked to the window. Rain had begun to fall again, tracing lines down the glass like nature was reminding me that not all storms are loud. Some are slow, steady, relentless. I looked at my reflection, hair messy, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but spine straight. It's not about winning anymore. It's about exposure. They tried to shame me into silence. I turned their threats into kindling. I had spent days reeling from their digital ambush, but now I was on my feet, steady, focused, and furious. The flames they lit online only gave me light to see what I needed to do next. I opened my laptop, took a breath, and started digging. Emails, text threads, voicemails. Years of overlooked details were now clues. I remembered what Mr. Holcomb, my high school journalism teacher, once told us. Document everything. Always. Especially when they tell you not to. He meant it for news stories, but tonight it felt like prophecy. Naomi came over with coffee and a fire in her eyes. "You want the files from your old phones? I've got converters in time." She set up on my dining table like it was a war room. Within hours, the folders began to stack. Conversations with Margot that once felt like passive-aggressive noise now glared with intent. Texts from Richard masked as fatherly advice were laced with guilt tactics. Brandon's smug sarcasm, evidence of coercion in hindsight. Around midnight, Charlotte knocked. She held a worn shoebox. This isn't mine. I think it got mixed up with my mail when Aiden was over. I didn't open it, but your name's on some papers inside." I blinked. "You're sure?" She nodded. I figured it might matter. I set it on the floor like it was a live wire. When I finally opened it, my pulse kicked into overdrive. Inside was a draft of a trust agreement. It was dated just a year ago. The title read, "Caldwell Family Distribution Plan." I flipped to the second page. They're listed in neat rows were beneficiaries Brandon, Vanessa, Aiden, and Sophia. My name was nowhere. Not even a footnote. Not a clause. Nothing. "Wow," Naomi whispered. "They erased you. Legally." My mouth went dry, and probably meant for me never to find this. "Except they're sloppy," she added, pulling out her phone. "Let's document chain of custody." Charlotte found it. "You opened it here. This is now evidence." By the following morning, Danica had 3 binders, one filled with communications, another with the trust documents, and a third with property records. I watched her flip through each page with surgical precision, her expression unreadable, until she finally leaned back and let out a slow, controlled exhale. This could trigger a forced asset liquidation. I blinked. "Explain." "If we prove the fraud plus your exclusion from the trust tied to misused collateral, there's grounds to freeze the family assets. Not just the condo, their primary residence, investments, even retirement accounts, if co-mingled." My stomach churned and steadied all at once. So if we play this right, we're not playing anymore, she cut in. We're proving. That night, as Naomi and I reviewed everything once more, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see a victim. I saw a strategist, a woman piecing together years of gaslighting and betrayal into a map of truth. I'd spent most of my life asking them to see me. Now, I didn't need them to look, I was making sure the law would. They had called me emotional, unstable, dramatic. But what they hadn't counted on was that I had receipts and I had allies. I sat at Danica's office again the next day. This time, calmer, confident. When she finished typing, she looked at me and asked, "Do you want to pursue the full course?" My answer was immediate. Then we're not stopping at just saving my condo. We're taking their house. They wrote me out of everything. I rewrote the ending. The hallway outside the courtroom was lined with dull beige paint and bulletin boards filled with flyers that no one read. Legal aid mediation programs, lost dog notices. The fluorescents buzzed faintly above me, blending with the low thrum of court proceedings behind closed doors. I was cold, despite the blazer. Or maybe it was the anticipation that left my skin prickling like a storm preparing to break. Danica sat beside me, her tablet balanced on her lap, flipping through exhibits one last time. Her calm exterior was something I admired, measured, always calculating. But today, even she tapped her stylus with a little more force. "They've tied themselves into this," she said, not looking up. "We're not just poking the bear. We're asking the court to muzzle it." I forced a smile, though my palms were clammy. This was the moment I stopped being the collateral damage and became the one who initiated the chain reaction. We were filing a motion to treat the Caldwell family home as a fraudulent asset, one tied directly to my name, my signature, my blind trust. It was no longer just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about making sure they could never do this again to anyone else. The court clerk's office door clicked open. A balding man in wire-rimmed glasses stepped out with a stack of files. Next, he called. Danica rose. I followed, heart in my throat. We approached the counter and she slid the motion folder across to him. "We're filing for discovery and asset injunction," she said smoothly. "Attached is the documentation supporting lien manipulation and forged co-signatures." He barely blinked. Name on the motion: Rachel Morgan versus Brandon Caldwell et al. His fingers danced across the keyboard. Hearing request logged. Tentative date: April 30th. Confirmation by Monday. If the judge deems the exhibit sufficient, you'll move to the evidentiary phase within 2 weeks. Stamped. Initialed. Logged. As mundane as buying stamps, but with the potential to upend everything. We exited into a gust of wind that swept Danica's coat around her like a cape. The courthouse steps seemed longer than they had on the way in. "Are you okay?" she asked, unlocking the car. I didn't answer right away. I glanced at the sky, slate gray, with patches of light fighting to break through. "It's strange," I said finally. "This building, I always thought it was where justice happened. Not strategy." Danica gave a short laugh. "Justice is just strategy that finally lands." The ride back was quiet, filled with half-finished thoughts. Naomi texted updates from the office, promising she'd cross-check old emails from Brandon's assistant. Charlotte had left another voicemail, this time with real concern. "He was pacing outside again," she said. "Looked like he hadn't slept." I let the message play twice. It didn't make me feel safer, just more certain we were pushing the right buttons. At home, I parked and sat for a while, hands wrapped around the steering wheel like it could anchor me. I pulled the motion from my bag and laid it on the passenger seat. Danica had labeled it meticulously, "Motion to freeze Caldwell family property. Fraud case. RMABCMCARCE." The initials alone made my stomach clench. My entire lineage reduced to a filing code. I opened my phone and scrolled through our shared case folder. There were exhibits I'd forgotten. We even had Charlotte's trust discovery, Naomi's party footage, the voice memo from Margot in her kitchen. We'd built this not out of malice, but out of necessity. And still, I felt the ache. Because no matter how clean the case looked, it didn't erase the betrayal. Danica had said earlier, If the judge sees it like I do, they'll have to choose to keep the house or face full discovery. It echoed in my chest. That choice they'd never imagined anyone could force it on them. That I could. I looked up at the sky. It had deepened into soft purples, now bruised like old regret. A storm was coming, not weather, but reckoning. Let them choose. Either way, I win. Courtrooms are built on order. But that day, I watched my family unravel in chaos. The county courthouse on May 15th had the heavy air of finality. Gray skies loomed outside, casting a pallor over the polished tile floors and fluorescent lights. Inside the courtroom, I could feel the chill not from the temperature, but from the assembled stares. Brandon sat like a stone sculpture at the defense table, jaw locked tied too tight. Margot clutched her purse like it held the last of her dignity. Richard, eyes trained somewhere over my shoulder, refused to acknowledge me. Vanessa looked more annoyed than afraid, her hand resting on Aiden's shoulder, as if that might shield her from consequence. Danica stood beside me in a charcoal blazer, her confidence woven into every line of her body. She whispered, "This is the start of their unraveling. Keep your composure." Judge Hadley entered, and the gavel fell like thunder. Civil case 25.9 C. Morgan vs. Caldwell et al. My name filled the room. Not theirs, mine. The plaintiff. Danica opened strong. We will demonstrate that my client, Rachel Morgan, was financially exploited and defrauded by her family through forged signatures and misappropriated assets. The judge raised a brow, but said nothing. He gestured for the first piece of evidence. Margot's recorded confession was queued up and piped through the courtroom speakers. Her voice crackled, but rang clear. Rachel was just a name on paper. We needed the loan. Gasps. I didn't even flinch. I watched Brandon lean forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer, whose eyes widened with each passing second. Vanessa tensed beside him. Margot didn't blink, though her face flushed a violent pink. Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years in that moment. His face, once cold and hard, sagged into something almost human. Almost. Objections flew. Danica parried them all, citing timestamp's chain of custody, the delivery of the cease and desist, and the fact that Margot had not denied her voice when given the chance. The judge nodded slowly. We'll proceed. Next came the party footage Naomi had salvaged, Brandon mocking me. Then the push my stumble, the look of quiet horror that followed before the clip cut off. The silence afterward was crushing. It wasn't theatrical. It was real and damning. Then came the financials. Pages upon pages showing liens, signatures, filing dates. I spoke slowly, my voice steady. This is my name. Used without consent. This is the lien release, one I never signed. The shell company RVC Holdings is managed by Brandon Caldwell. My condo was listed as collateral. I looked over at Brandon. His face twitched at the corners. A man so sure of his control now couldn't even meet my gaze. Danica turned the final page. Your Honor, we're requesting an injunction to freeze all Caldwell family assets until this matter is fully reviewed by the court. A pause. Then the judge spoke, voice firm but composed. The evidence presented raises serious legal and ethical concerns. Effective immediately, all property transfers, financial activity, and ownership claims tied to the Caldwell estate are to be suspended pending full investigation. That includes the primary residence in West Hartford. A ripple went through the room like a dropped pebble in a still lake. Vanessa whispered something harsh to Brandon. Margot closed her eyes. Richard visibly stiffened. Even Aiden, sensing something big, gripped his mother's sleeve and whispered, Mom? The judge continued. Further motions will be addressed after the discovery phase. This court is adjourned for today. The gavel slammed down. Final. Absolute. I stood. The courtroom didn't applaud. There was no victory music. Just a silence so loud it rang in my ears. As I turned to leave, Brandon leaned forward slightly, his voice low and full of venom. You'll regret dragging this into the light. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. They hid behind bloodlines. I stood on facts. The envelope sat between us like a live wire. Danica hadn't said a word since sliding it across the desk. Her fingers, usually so quick and efficient, lingered over its seal like she couldn't believe what it contained. I didn't open it right away. My eyes studied her face first, the faint twitch in her jaw, the measured inhale, and only then did I break the seal. Inside were copies of a transfer deed from 2017. My name appeared once, then again. Not just as a witness, not just as a co-signer, but as a joint title holder. "I don't understand," I whispered. "They told me it was just paperwork." Danica leaned forward, her voice low but unwavering. "It wasn't just paperwork, Rachel. It was ownership. Legally, this document makes you a 51% stakeholder in the Caldwell property." I felt the air shift around me, like the entire room had tilted. For years, I believed I was the outsider, the one barely tolerated at holidays, the scapegoat, the name omitted. And yet here it was, in print and notarized. I was not the outcast. I was the anchor. "How did this get missed?" I asked. "Because they never expected you to look," she said. "They buried it under a newer document. But that newer deed? It's invalid without this one being revoked." And it never was. My head throbbed. I stood, walked to the window, and pressed my palm to the glass. Outside, the wind rattled a loose screen. A storm was coming, no longer just metaphorical. Naomi burst through the door moments later, still wearing her scrubs. She saw the expression on my face and froze. "What happened?" I handed her the papers. She scanned them quickly, eyes widening. "Wait, this means—" "I own it," I said. "I own more than they do." "Holy," she blinked. "No wonder they've been scrambling." Later that night, alone in my condo, I stared at the court filing Danica had already prepared. It would be delivered by morning. Brandon would read it over coffee, probably with Vanessa peering over his shoulder, and it would confirm the truth: the house he'd called his kingdom wasn't his to rule. A text buzzed on my phone. "Danica again. Update legal filing confirmed." Brandon received it. According to my source, he nearly broke a glass in his office. No words, no rebuttals, just a contained explosion across town that I could feel from my living room. I stepped onto the balcony. The city felt quieter tonight, like the air itself had paused to register what just shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't fighting for scraps at their table. I was sitting at the head of it, and they never saw it coming. I couldn't stop rereading the document. Each time my eyes skimmed the lines, a new wave of anger rose in my chest. Anger at them and at myself. How many holidays had I sat through while Brandon bragged about renovations, about building something from nothing? How many dinners had Margot hosted in that house while pretending I was a guest in their kingdom when I had been an owner all along? Danica placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "This changes everything," she said. "You're not just a victim, Rachel. You're a stakeholder. That means leverage." I nodded, still stunned. "And they've been acting like I'm disposable." "Because they thought you were," she replied. "But now, you're a threat to their control." Later, after Naomi left, I sat in the dark with only the flicker of streetlights bouncing off the condo walls. I remembered my father's words he probably never imagined I'd use against him. No daughter of mine will control this house, he'd once barked when I questioned a bill in my name, but now I did. Legally, quietly, entirely. And the best part, I hadn't taken anything. I had only claimed what was already mine. By morning, the paperwork had been officially processed, and Danica forwarded the confirmation with a quiet, almost reverent message. "They can't ignore this now." The calm in her voice carried weight. It was the calm before a legal storm. I spent the rest of the morning drafting a timeline, organizing everything: the refinance, the false lien, release the signatures, the trust document Charlotte had found. Piece by piece, the puzzle was no longer scattered. It was a loaded weapon of truth. When Naomi returned that afternoon, she brought groceries and determination. "We're not backing down." "Not now," she said, as she laid out coffee and snacks like we were prepping for battle. "We're going to hit them where it hurts control." I nodded, and we sat side by side as I practiced how I'd explain my ownership in court. It wasn't just about legal rights, it was about identity. about being told for decades that I didn't belong in the very structure that bore my name on the deed. At sunset, Danica called with one final note. Brandon's lawyers tried to challenge the filing. It didn't work. He's rattled. They all are. I stared at the ceiling for a long time that night, letting silence fill the room like a tide. For the first time, it wasn't emptiness, it was validation. I had never wanted their approval. I had wanted the truth, and now I held it. They didn't just steal from me. They stole what was mine. For years, they made me feel small. But paper cuts build paper trails. The news broke just after noon on a Wednesday. I was staring at the window above my kitchen sink, half listening to the kettle hiss, when Naomi's voice came through the speakerphone like thunder. "It's happening," she said. "Turn on channel 7. Now!" The screen blinked to life. A banner crawled across the bottom. Caldwell Family Assets, frozen in fraud investigation. And there, it was our family name. Not on a glossy holiday card, not in a charity banquet brochure, but splashed across the morning news like a stain. Danica called minutes later. Her voice, though calm, carried urgency. The judge issued a partial seizure. The condo's safe, but their accounts, the shell business, is frozen. My breath caught. What about the house? Not yet. But Brandon's investors pulled out, and Margot's interview with WCTN backfired. Backfired was putting it lightly. The clip had already gone viral. In it, Margot sat rigid, clutching pearls like a lifeline, trying to spin the situation as a family misunderstanding. Mid-sentence, her voice cracked. Then silence. Her eyes fluttered, and she collapsed, live on air. The anchor's stunned gasp played on a loop across social media, remixed and memed. "Karma takes its tea," Hot One comment read. I didn't laugh. That night, I met Danica and Naomi at the office. We spread out the new court filings, audit flags, regulatory letters, proof of the unraveling. Richard had been named in a whistleblower tip filed with the state. Vanessa, after months of defending Brandon, had stormed out of a family dinner 2 nights earlier, slamming the door loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "They're fracturing," Danica said. "It's not just about your case anymore. This is snowballing." "Good," I said. But my voice shook. Charlotte knocked on my door just after 10. She held out a Tupperware of pasta and a small bag of lavender sachets. "You looked pale this morning," she said gently. And I figured, this kind of war takes calories. I nearly cried. Not from the kindness itself, but from the fact that it came unasked, unattached to guilt. That was a rare currency in my world. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse as microphones and cameras swarmed me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence, intentional, defiant, became its own statement. News outlets ate it up. One headline read, "She said nothing," and that said everything. Inside, I sat beside Danica in yet another meeting room as the legal team discussed asset reallocation strategies. Naomi stayed close, taking notes, highlighting key phrases, helping where she could. I kept my voice low, my gaze steady. "Is this what winning feels like?" I asked once we were alone. "No," she said. "This is what not losing looks like. Winning comes later." The air between us stilled. I understood. Victory wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. Peace. I read the headlines. For once, they called me what I was rightful heir. Later that evening, as I brewed tea and flipped through the paperwork, Danica had sent my phone buzzed with a single message from Naomi. "Naomi, they're trying to sell the house. You ready to finish this?" I stared at the screen. The tea cooled in my hand. Yes, I was ready. I didn't need revenge. I needed restoration. The building was quiet that morning, eerily so. No clacking heels, no rustling suits, no murmurs of nervous anticipation. Just the tap of my own footsteps echoing off the linoleum as I followed Danica down the corridor to the settlement room. It felt like walking through a memory, except this time, I wasn't the one being summoned. I was the one setting the terms. Naomi met us at the end of the hall, holding a folder pressed tight against her chest. She wore the same blue dress from Brandon's birthday, the one she'd worn out of solidarity when the world still treated me like family wallpaper. Today, it looked different, like armor. Inside the table was set. Legal assistants moved with quiet precision, their presence clinical but strangely comforting. Margot sat on the far end, arms folded, her face an immovable mask. Her once perfect blowout had wilted at the edges. The tension in her jaw said everything she wouldn't dare voice. Danica flipped through the papers. "No surprises," she said, calm and confident. "This document transfers full ownership of the condo to you. It dissolves all liens, removes their names, and closes all pathways for future claims. You'll sign here, here, and here." Margot didn't object. She didn't even blink. For once, she seemed to know she'd lost. I picked up the pen. Its weight pressed into my hand like finality. As I signed line by line, I felt something unwind inside me, like a rubber band finally released after years of being stretched thin. Each loop of ink felt like a key turning. Naomi sat quietly beside me. When I was done, she whispered, "This isn't just about paperwork. You just shut the last door they ever left open." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw the unwavering belief in her eyes. I nodded once. That was all I could manage. As we stepped into the hall, Charlotte stood waiting. She handed me a small bouquet of wildflowers, sunflowers, daisies, sprigs of lavender, and a tin of shortbread cookies tied neatly with twine. "I figured you could use something sweet today," she said softly. "You've had enough bitterness." The hug that followed was unexpected and perfect, gentle grounding. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Back at my condo, I opened the windows. The breeze felt new. I walked through every room, pausing by the bookshelf, the kitchen counter, the hallway, where I'd once crouched, shoulder-bruised, spirit heavier than any bruise could explain. Now I moved with purpose, not fear. I touched the walls. They didn't feel haunted anymore. They felt like mine. Danica's courier arrived just after sunset. A red folder, crisp and clean, with the final deed inside. I opened it on the kitchen counter. There it was, my name and mine alone. I didn't cry. I smiled. Control doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs softly and walks away with the truth. Later, as I brewed tea, Naomi texted dinner soon. No drama. Just us. You pick the place. For the first time in years, the idea of choosing didn't feel overwhelming. I was no longer surviving. I was building. Just after 9, the doorbell rang. I walked slowly to the door. The hallway felt longer than usual, as if giving me space to reflect. When I opened it, no one stood there. But on the mat, a letter. No return address, no stamp, just my name. Typed. Neat. Cold. I brought it inside, peeled it open with deliberate care. Inside was a single page. No letterhead, no signature, just a few lines typed with sharp precision. I sat back down with the letter in my lap. My fingers grazed its edges as if it might bite. The lines inside weren't threatening. They were careful, calculated, familiar. There was no apology, no confession. Just a statement. You got what you wanted. Let it be enough. Let it be enough. 4 words, but they carried every ounce of my family's entitlement. Even in retreat, they wanted control over my closure. But this time, I didn't need their permission to be whole. I folded the letter once, twice, and slid it into the drawer with the deed. Then I poured more tea, turned off my phone, and sat by the window. The world outside was soft and blue, the kind of sky you don't notice until the noise is gone. This was mine now. My silence, my space, my ending. Let them keep their secrets. I have my story. They once erased me with silence. I answered with a signature. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the lake glimmered like it knew something I didn't. Mist curled above the surface in soft ribbons, vanishing with every breath of wind. The porch beneath my feet creaked slightly as I stepped out, coffee mug in hand, barefoot and calm. This cabin wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Just 2 bedrooms, 1 kitchen, a fireplace that needed repair, and a porch with a view that made silence feel sacred. I had bought it 3 weeks ago quietly, with funds I had once been told weren't truly mine. It was tucked an hour outside the city where no one could mistake peace for distance. I sat on the porch swing and pulled the faded journal from my sweater pocket. The pages were warped from years of starts and stops, but this morning the words came like they had been waiting. Dear Mom, I didn't fight for the house. I fought for my place in this world. I paused. The pen hovered as wind lifted my hair, brushing it against my cheek like an old whisper. I didn't write to guilt her. There was no apology I wanted, only recognition from myself that I had survived, that I had built something from the broken beams they left me with. I folded the paper, slowly slid it into an old manila folder that still smelled faintly of lavender, and tucked it between two books on the shelf inside beside my college thesis and the lease from my first apartment. It didn't belong in a drawer. It belonged among the things that made me who I was. My phone buzzed on the counter. Naomi, Memorial Day, dinner. You coming? I smiled and typed back, yes, and I'm bringing pie. The reply was instant. Only if it's that cinnamon one. Laughter slipped from my lips without warning. A simple joy earned, not gifted. Outside birds sang without choreography. A cardinal darted past, bold against the blue sky. I stepped onto the grass, the dew cool beneath my feet, coffee still warm in my hands. I closed my eyes and breathed in deep. It didn't smell like victory or vindication. It smelled like cedar morning and things growing back. Later that morning, I opened the window by the kitchen and let the breeze roll in. It carried the smell of pine and earth, untamed, unapologetic. I poured a second cup of coffee and thought of Margot's voice, once so sharp it could slice through silence. It no longer reached me. Her power had lived in absence, in the way she could twist emptiness into accusation. But even her memory felt dulled, now muted by the weight of my own clarity. I took the journal back outside and reread the letter. Not to change anything, just to feel the cadence of my own truth uninterrupted. It read less like closure and more like resurrection. Not everything could be restored. Some things were never whole to begin with. But I no longer needed to stitch the past together. I had become something stronger, stitched with scars, sure, but also with choice. I stood again in the doorway of my own life, exactly where I needed to be. No signatures required. The porch boards creaked beneath me as I leaned on the railing. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. This time, I make room. For myself. They told me I was overreacting. That family was sacred, no matter what they took, no matter how they hurt me. But I know now silence only protects the ones doing the damage. If you saw yourself in my story, if you've ever been made to feel small, erased or used, please know this, you're not alone, and you are not powerless. Speak up. Document everything. Trust your instincts. It doesn't have to be loud to be revolutionary. I didn't burn bridges. I built my own path, and it led me to peace. If you're walking that same lonely road, I'm walking beside you.